Well, hey everybody, it's Jasvinder, and well, we are almost done with 2016, and I could not be happier about that. So, I hope everybody has some awesome plans for the New Year's. Hope everyone had a good holiday, and just have fun, and don't do anything I wouldn't do, which leaves you a lot of options. So, what we're talking about today is the latest blog, which is how to expand your mind, and we talk about learning all the time in these videos and in the writing that's getting put up on my site. It's sort of pretty much a constant theme, because what are we doing? We're just teaching new concepts, new ways of looking at things, and reclaiming ideas that have fallen to the level of platitudes and sound bites, right? So this idea of being a lifelong learner would be one of them. So there's something it says in the Tao Te Ching where he says that knowledge of your ignorance is strength, right? So to be aware of the things that you don't know and to do something about it. Because when you know what you don't know, you still don't know it, but you're aware that you don't know it, right? Then you have a lot of room to maneuver around it, right? You're not just completely blind. Most people feel like they're being held back in some way by things that they are ignorant of, and they are also ignorant of their ignorance, right? So you don't know what you're looking for, you're not sure what you're missing, which means you're not sure when you find it if it's even it, because you don't know. So if you don't know, you don't know. So we want to get into how do you develop a kind of lifestyle of learning, and not just learning information, but really expanding the range of your conceptual mind, and expanding the kinds of thinking that are available to you. Not just what kinds of things can you think, but how many different ways can you think. That's super important, and that's not something that really is taught directly. It's sort of taught by inference. When you're just going through your normal schooling, you take English classes and science classes and math classes and so on, history class, right? So those all represent different ways of approaching things. When you're going to try to understand poetry, you're just not thinking the same way as if you're looking at a bunch of sedimentary rock and trying to figure out what you're looking at, with like fossilized prehistoric insects and stuff. It's just not, it's a different mentality. It's not just different information. You see what I'm saying? So where do we begin with this? First of all, let's just talk about how important it is to maintain this relationship with learning and growing and expanding, because it's pretty cut and dry that you have a need to grow. Remember, we talk about human needs psychology quite a bit. So these needs are, in order: stability and security, variety or instability, significance and recognition, love and connection, and then growth and contribution. So you have to keep growing. One of the reasons why growth is important, it just sounds like a nice thing to say, that you want to keep growing. But let's let's actually kind of ground that in something that really carries some weight. If you think about people who became very successful and then got to a point where they said, okay, I now realize, these things used to be so important to me, but now I can see that money and fame and social status and making movies and making lots of money is just not important. Well, it's not that those things are unimportant. They're no more or no less important than anything else, but those things had so much meaning for that person when a process of radical and tremendous growth, explosive growth, was what was bringing those things to them, right? growth was what made them meaningful because it's higher up the scale of needs. When you stop growing and then you feel like something's missing, it doesn't mean that the success and the money and the recognition and everything that you have sort of accumulated around you doesn't mean anything anymore. It actually just means that you're missing that continuous experience of growth in your life, and because you're not recognizing it to be that, then you're looking around and saying nothing is filling the void. Well, no, those things are just fine. They don't mean or not mean anything. They just are what they are, right? It's just that the need to, they came into your life because you were growing, and now that you're not growing anymore, they don't mean what they mean when they were being drawn in. Does that make sense? So learning is a way of, learning and growing they're basically synonymous, right? As long as we're not talking about gardening. So so learning is really about keeping you in touch with, I would really say, the part of you that is still a child. Because, I always talk about this because my experience raising my own daughter, who will be 4 in April, is that I got to see with my own eyes all these concepts that I had just read about for years and years and years in different spiritual texts. The idea that, how many times have you heard something along the line of, to return to the purity of a child, right? It's all over Eastern philosophy. It's all over, a lot of different, even like Christianity and stuff, talks about stuff like this. So, and numerous philosophers talk about it too. So the reason why the purity of a child is intrinsically related to the act of learning is because what does a child do? What does a baby do? It just pushes insistently at its current limitations until it's mastered. And it's mastered those limitations and assimilated them and turned them into skills like walking, talking, climbing things, running around, throwing things, pulling things, like your hair, So it just doesn't accept limits. It just sees, it gets to a point where it goes, okay, I can't do this. And it goes, well, that's not acceptable. I should be able to do this. The fact that I've come far enough to realize that here's a line means that I need to cross over to the other side of that, and I need to make this into something I've got a handle on. And they just don't give up. And so they're just taking in information all the time, and they're not filtering any of it. They're just saying there's nothing out here that I don't want to bring in and process and digest, because they're forming and refining their sense of identity and who they are in the world. So you can never really afford to stop doing that. It's not enough that you know how to talk and walk and climb and you're housebroken and you can speak your native language and you got through school however you got through it and you have some kind of job that you do. Does that mean that you're done with learning? I hope not. Because what happens to you when you stop learning is that you abandon your own need for growth. And when you do that, you are just neglecting yourself, pure and simple. You are neglecting your needs. The same way that people kid themselves that they don't care about financial stability at all. That's complete baloney. Or the same way people think that they just need routine and they don't like variety and they don't like surprises. Baloney, right? People are different with how they need these things, but we all do need them in some degree, right? Otherwise you stagnate. And it's not so much that you stagnate, but it's really because you are chronically deprived of something you need, like some kind of mineral deficiency in your body, right? So learning keeps you in a place where there is a sense of newness about life. Growth and variety are really related to each other, because when you are always bringing in new things into your world, then it does all kinds of things for you. What does it do? I'm just going to kind of bullet point them a little bit. Learning, in no particular order, learning makes you less embarrassed when you don't know something. So it makes it easier for you to admit that you don't know. It makes it easier for you to ask and ask for directions, for example, and go look something up or go read about something. It makes you, I would say, less threatened by the uncertainties of the world, because when you face what's unknown with the attitude of a learner, you realize that the state of unknownness about whatever it is fundamentally temporary, and you know that you have the capacity to go and gain an understanding about it, right? And it just makes you less compulsive. I think it makes you less compulsive because you inadvertently discard outdated ways of thinking and acting when you are bringing in new things. Because if those new things overwrite or supplant or replace or upgrade existing programming in your head, then you just, like, you wouldn't walk around with two methods of tying your shoes and have to decide each time you went and did it, right? If you learned a new way to do it, you would just default to the new way and discard the old one kind of automatically. So it kind of keeps you fresh, right? And it keeps you engaged, and it keeps you, attentive, and it nurtures a sense of curiosity in you. And curiosity is everything, because your level of enjoyment about life is basically equal to your level of curiosity about it. Your interest in other people. How are you supposed to have a relationship if you don't take interest in other people to begin with? If you just want to talk at them, or you want to just hang around with them, this is all not, you don't want that. You want curiosity, enthusiasm, and interest, and somebody who enjoys learning and is really in touch with the kind of life expanding and world expanding and identity expanding side effects or main effects of learning. And it has quite a bit of enthusiasm and does take an interest in situations, in people, in places, in things, in the history of things, in what other people are thinking and what they know that maybe you don't know. And learning is a lot like a muscle. Learning is like when it becomes strong and developed, then there's this healthy desire for challenges. If you start working out and going to the gym, or if you're learning a musical instrument or learning a foreign language, you get to a point where you're good enough at it where you start to think, okay, what more can I do with this? How much farther can I take this? What about trying this out? What about doing that? Like if you're learning Spanish, eventually you get to the point where you want to walk into, like let's say a market in an all Spanish speaking neighborhood, or go to a Spanish speaking country and just not use a dictionary or anything. So you set challenges for yourself. Same thing with this kind of stuff. So, as I said earlier in the beginning, there are basically two kinds of things that can be learned. Things that you know that you don't know, and things that you don't know that you don't know. So you obviously can't seek out information or knowledge or perspective on something when you are not aware that this is something you don't even know about. It's literally in your blind spot, right? All you can do is collide with it. Okay? It's not going to be like a car crash, though. It's just going to be you being confronted with something that you really had no idea even existed, or had no idea, like maybe you thought you knew it. If you think you know something, it could turn out that you don't know that you don't know. So all you can take initiative about is information that you know that you don't know, and you go out and learn it. And the more that you do that, the more you are prepared for when you're confronted with things you don't know that you don't know, especially when they're things that you thought you knew. So a lot of these sentences are getting very, like, not quite tongue twisters, but they're getting like, know that you don't know, and you knew that you knew, and it's, bear with me, okay? I'm not really sure linguistically how else to convey this, right? But I realize they are, kind of tedious sentences. So you will get confronted with new information. And, if you see people who are basically like a walking antique shop, like they always kind of tell the same stories, and their attitudes haven't changed in 10, 20, 30, 40, even 50 years at some point, or they just have inflexible opinions about something, well, there's obviously tons of stuff they don't understand, right? So probably that person is not really much in the habit of being a learner. You see what I'm getting at? Because when you keep that flexible in you, and you keep yourself, when you keep yourself able to take in new information, then you welcome it when it comes uninvited, because it's just knowledge, right? And you're hungry for knowledge. So practically, how do we do this? What do I do? So the way I do this is, I have a lot of time during the day where I'm just in the car commuting, and I'll listen to things like lectures or debates by public intellectuals. There are a lot of YouTube channels that have amazing stuff. I mean, lots of talks by people who are really professionally outside of anything that I did well in school with, right? Like mathematicians and scientists and, theoretical physicists and evolutionary biologists and economic theorists, and people who study things like memetics or semiotics, things like that. There are some great YouTube channels like The School of Life is a great one. The Nerd Writer is a great one. And the Nerd Writer is really cool because he does really awesome and almost like disconcertingly articulate videos, because he's like 24 and it's like, how the fuck are you at this level, right? But he's doing these videos about like movies and music and poetry and even like classical art and stuff. Super insightful, makes you think about what you're watching or listening to or reading in pretty, I would say, in vastly new ways, which I love that, because he's done reviews on some of my favorite stuff. So I've actually gone back and watched movies that I had already seen, like Children of Men was one example, Ghost in the Shell was another, Wolf of Wall Street, after having watched these reviews, and I'm like, damn, that's like really spot on. And it gets you thinking about stuff that you wouldn't be thinking about normally. Because most of us, when we watch movies or we listen to music, we're just kind of pouring the stimulus of it into ourselves. Some of us might be thinking critically, some more than others, but it's cool when people have done a whole lot of thinking about XYZ thing. So there's a lot of stuff out there, and I try to go for things that are pulling from an expertise quite foreign to mine, right? I don't actually listen to that much stuff about Eastern philosophy or yogic mysticism or motivational stuff. Not really. It's like I'm outputting that kind of stuff. So I'm drawing my ideas from other places, right? I'm listening to all different kinds of music, classical music from lots of different eras, contemporary off-the-wall stuff like Stockhausen and Edgar Varese and like some really out there stuff, to like neoclassicists and sort of ultra romantic like Stravinsky and Shostakovich, and then all the way back through like Bach, maybe sometimes Mozart, Beethoven, Ravel, Debussy, Chopin, whatever, right? And all the way to like something like Marina and the Diamonds or Bjork or Slayer, right? Or anything, because the idea is these things are pushing buttons in you emotionally, and the places they take you, and you really want to kind of take a tour of the whole house of yourself, so to speak. I think pretty often. I think you don't want to lose touch with different sort of areas of your psyche, and music is one of the most effective things I think ever to do that. And I use it in that way, and it's not analytical, right? It's really experiential, but I'm deliberately taking myself into these experiences. Like there's some music that is just so gut-wrenching, right, and so evocative and poignant, and then there's stuff that is just like Queens of the Stone Age, where Queens of the Stone Age sounds like someone throwing a cigarette into a pool of gasoline underneath like a like a scene in an action movie, right? Like blowing something up by throwing a cigarette into a puddle of gasoline, right? So there's this whole spectrum, and it just sort of keeps you in touch with this. That spectrum is part of your own humanity. It's part of your human identity, you know. And I think that's a form of learning, a form of self-learning, you know. So those are just some ideas. But what I would suggest is to get into that kind of an approach about stuff, because what that does for me is that keeps me curious, it keeps me enthusiastic, it keeps me looking for new things, and it keeps me really trying to challenge my thinking, you know, like going back to music that I'd written off as lame, or, you know, going back to a certain kind of philosophy I couldn't understand. Like when I first ran into, I don't know, Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett, when I first ran into them, I was really put off by them. I thought they were extremely smug and arrogant, sort of know-it-all type people. But I was also a little bit rattled by it, because some of my beliefs were left in tatters after hearing what they had to say. And I wasn't willing to just cover it up with cognitive dissonance, right? How about that? Think about that for yourself. If there are places where you just can't bring yourself to reconcile your beliefs over here to the facts over here. That's, somebody pointed out recently, that's called post-truth. Do you want to be like that? Do you want to be like spokespeople for the Donald Trump campaign and just live in a world of like made-up nonsense? Or do you want to take your beliefs and the facts and reconcile them to each other? Learning new information and confronting things that make you uncomfortable and that you don't quite understand is really, I don't see what other way there is to do it, right? Because it gets you into this idea of growing and expanding and refreshing yourself. And you're going to enjoy life a lot more if you're not threatened by what's unknown, and you have a very healthy appetite for diving into the unknown and building on what you do know. Well, guys, thank you for your time. I hope you found this meaningful. Please, share this video if this has served you. My name is Jasvinder. Have a happy New Year, everybody, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks.